IPVanish protects every device you own. Your phone, your laptop, your smart TV. If it connects to the internet, it should be protected. IPVanish encrypts your connection and masks your IP address, helping keep your browsing private at home and on public Wi-Fi. And with no device limits, one account covers everything. Stream with added privacy, browse securely, connect with confidence. Online protection made simple. Right now, save 83% off the 2-year plan. Get started today at ipvanish.com/audio and take control of your privacy with IPVanish.
Welcome to the Lord of the Rings Lorecast, the show that explores the background of Tolkien's amazing world from the very beginning. One of the things that the Peter Jackson films, specifically the Hobbit films, did so well was to highlight the rift in Bilbo's personality between his Baggins side and his Took side. Now, some people might critique that and say, well, they kind of pushed it a little too much. It does come up a lot in those 3 films. But I think it is foundationally an important aspect of Bilbo's character and the reason why he is sought out among all the other hobbits. He's the one that Gandalf comes for. And it's because of that Took side. And like I talked about in the previous episode, the hints that Gandalf had previously done something very similar with the old Took, among other individuals historically that we never really get the stories about. So welcome back, and in today's episode, we are going to be digging even more into that split between the Took and the Baggins side. And we're only a few pages into the story already, and I hope you're excited because we're going to knock out maybe another page or two. I hope you're enjoying it. Let's get into it. So here we are. We're starting on the paragraph that says, "Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins." If you recall, in the previous paragraph, Tolkien, or the narrator, I guess I should say, because it is its own distinct character, the narrator was about to explain the mother of Bilbo, but decided that they first had to explain what hobbits were because we, as the listeners, were not familiar with hobbits. And that's true. When this book came out, nobody knew what a hobbit was. This was a brand new word that Tolkien invented himself for this story when he jotted down on that paper he was grading about the hole in the ground lived a hobbit. But we finally get a look at who Bilbo's parents are. And that is here, right in the beginning of the story, for a very important reason. Bilbo is his parents. He's both of them. He comes from both the Took and the Baggins line, and his personality is split between them. And the narrator is foreshadowing this, although he's also letting us know that he's primarily lived his life in the Baggins mode and thinks that that is the proper way to live his life because of the social context that he's in. We also come to find out that, well, you would assume that the Bagginses would be the wealthy ones and the Tooks might be the ones who are not as wealthy, not as well-to-do, not seen as much in a positive light in society. But we're told here that Bilbo's father, Bungo Baggins, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for Belladonna Took when they got married. And partly with her money. Now, this may have been like a dowry sort of thing. I'm not an expert about these kinds of things, but I think the more important detail here is that they both come from some amount of money. And that's what afforded the building of this home, or the, I guess, digging of this home, because it's a hole. But we learn more about these characters. We know that Bilbo's father was solid and comfortable because he is like a second edition of his father, solid and comfortable. And then we find out that he got something a bit queer in his makeup from the Took side. This is Bilbo. Something that only waited for a chance to come out. Again, foreshadowing that we are going to see him act more like a Took at some point in the future. And that means less like a common or standardly accepted Hobbit is supposed to act. And this is giving us a sense of why Gandalf is coming specifically for him. Why Bilbo, among so many other hobbits, let alone other kinds of creatures in this world, which have already been hinted at. We get this line at the beginning of the next paragraph, and don't you just love the size of these paragraphs? Some of Tolkien's paragraphs and sentences just feel like they go on forever. And I remember as a younger person reading this book and noticing that and enjoying it. This is something that many people would avoid today. The idea of a paragraph being any more than 3 sentences, my God, or looking like a wall of text, because that's just going to turn people away. No, for Tolkien, it was about explaining things in detail and in a way that was satisfying and enjoyable. And when you are diving into the text, you get lost in it. And there's something beautiful about that. But anyway, this next paragraph starts, "By some curious chance, one morning long ago in the quiet of the world, where there was less noise and more green." This betrays so much about Tolkien's perspective, which we've discussed before. He was fairly against the industrialization of the world. He saw that as kind of an evil, and a place that was more quiet, less noise, more green, was something to be enjoyed. It was a time and a place, although dangerous and wild, was also more natural and beautiful in its lack of noise and industry. And then we find out that Bilbo is a smoker, and this is a detail that in a modern children's story would not have been included. And the main difference here is that in 1937, they didn't know the dangers of smoking. This wasn't something that most people were aware of. In fact, smoking was seen as a healthy thing. It was promoted by the military, by the U.S. military, at least that I know of, because of conversations I've had with veterans in my own family, that this was something that was seen as a healthy thing. They would give soldiers packs of cigarettes in World War II or in the Korean War because that was seen as a way for them to relax and calm down. We now know that tobacco is dangerous. It causes cancer and all sorts of terrible things. But at the time, Tolkien didn't know, so he can be forgiven for that. And Bilbo here has an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes. Now, you have to remember that he's not very big, but that's still a fairly large pipe. And then we get Gandalf showing up. And Gandalf showing up is an important detail, and we know this because of the way that the narrator highlights this. The narrator says, Gandalf came by, and it breaks the description of the pipe and Bilbo hanging out at his front door, smoking it. Gandalf came by. Gandalf! Exclamation mark. These are rare. And you can see that this is done in a fun way to let the reader know that this is a character that we need to know about. The text here says, Gandalf came by. Gandalf! If you had heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. There's got to be a name for this thing that Tolkien does, and he does this a few different times in the text, and I'll try to make a mental note to point this out in the future, where he says a thing that defines how much or how little something is, or the knowledge of something is, or something like that. Like, if you had only heard a quarter of what I've heard about him, and then he steps it back again, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear. So I've only heard, if you've heard a quarter of what I've heard, which means I've heard a lot, and of everything there is to know, I only know a little bit. So he moves the measuring stick in both directions which is this kind of playful and fun way of saying, this is somebody you need to know about. He's important. And then he follows that up with, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. So now we know anything's possible. Tales and adventures sprout up all over the place wherever he went in the most extraordinary fashion. And I highlighted extraordinary here in my notes because I want to ask the question, is this extraordinary to us, the reader, or to the people of this world, or to the hobbits? My sense is everyone. His stories, the places he's been, the things that he has done are extraordinary no matter who you are. And then we find out a little bit more about him. There's a reason why Bilbo doesn't recognize him right away, which we're about to get to. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend the old Took died. Now this implies that Gandalf and the old Took were not only friends, but that the old Took was drawn into some of his adventures. That these two were maybe part of the reason why the Tooks had the reputation that they did. And maybe the old Took was kind of like Bilbo before Bilbo. And what adventures they went on, we don't know. And the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. Now, this detail here I find particularly interesting as well, because we come to find out later that hobbits live a longer life than humans, than you and I do. In fact, Bilbo being 50 years old doesn't mean that he's 50 years old in human terms. He's actually still a younger adult based on their timeline. So that means that if he hadn't been around in a long enough time for most of the hobbits to forget who he was, that it has been a considerable amount of time, 50, 100 years maybe, since Gandalf came this way. And side note here, as I point out these little details, I think these are things oftentimes that most of us pick up on, maybe even subconsciously. I know that as I've gone through and kind of notated my notes here, notated my notes is a little redundant, that I've gone through and noted everything, that these are things that are, when I put words to them, I feel like, oh, well, yeah, that's clearly what that implies. And I feel like that was something that is just kind of understood. But when you shine a light on it, it makes it more obvious and it becomes a point that we can actually discuss in detail. So I hope you're enjoying this very close look at these things. The text goes on and says he had been away over the hill and across the water. Now, it's highlighted the hill, or capitalized the hill and the water here. And I have to point out that clearly the water is the river that runs through Hobbiton and the Shire. And the fact that this is being described as he's been far away over the hill and across the water is kind of quaint and cute and a simple way to describe something like this to children whose worldview is small, and to say like, oh, past where you can see. But I think that also applies for the hobbits because most of them never leave the Shire. And so anything that goes on or leaves or travels beyond the water means out into the wide world, who knows where. And how big the world is, we don't really worry about it, but probably out there somewhere. It's kind of a vague thing that implies a much larger world and a small world view for the hobbits. And he goes across the water on business of his own, since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. And this plays into the idea that he's been gone for decades at least. But notice the text here. I found this little detail interesting, and I don't know why it is this way. I'm assuming, like we've discussed before, Tolkien knew what he was doing with grammar. He understood. When it notes hobbit boys, it's hobbit dash boys. And hobbit girls is just hobbit space girls. Hobbit boys seems like it's a singular thing. Hobbit girls seems like it's a description of the type of girl. At least that's the way I read that, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't just make them the same, whether just Hobbit space boys and Hobbit space girls or Hobbit dash boys, Hobbit dash girls. Not sure, but if you have a sense of why that would be, Please let me know. Comment on the Discord or on the Patreon episode, wherever you're listening to this. So then we get a description of what Gandalf looks like. Because from Bilbo's perspective, he doesn't recognize Gandalf right away. From his unsuspecting perspective, all he sees is an old man with a staff. He has a tall, pointed blue hat, which we all know about. This is iconic. Gandalf in a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, and another detail here, a silver scarf. Now, that is not one of those details that most people remember. Everyone remembers Gandalf for the gray cloak and the pointy hat. And I'm sure some people would even forget that it's blue. They would think maybe it's also just gray like the rest of his outfit. But a silver scarf is interesting. I think what this does and kind of implies here is that he's a traveler. He wears a cloak and a tall pointy hat. He's keeping himself covered. He's out in the wilderness. But he's also somebody who can wear a silver scarf. That silver in the scarf betrays something that's a little bit fancier than just blue or gray. There's something about that leads me to think that this was a detail and maybe even a garment given to him by somebody of means or by the elves. Something that's a little bit nicer than the rest of his outfit. A small detail that implies that there's more to him than what he initially seems. He also has a long white beard hung down below his waist and immense black boots because he's out there walking in the wilderness. So he has to have boots. And this leads directly into the classic good morning conversation. And I'm going to have to detail that after we take a quick break and thank the patrons. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. It's time for that spring reset. I'm taking a look at everything in my closet and figuring out that, oh no, this absolutely needs to go. And it's about time I replace things so that my clothes aren't older than my 15-year-old. Now you might think that they lasted that long because they were well made, but no, they're in terrible condition. Unlike the new jeans I just got from Quince. Jeans have always been my personal go-to because you can kind of wear them for lots of different things, but maybe they're not your thing. Maybe you're looking for, 100% European linen with insanely soft flow knit activewear fabric. It's definitely getting warmer, and their flow knit activewear is moisture wicking, anti-odor, and soft enough that you'll actually want to wear it every day. So pick out what you want. You can't go wrong because they have prices 50 to 60% less than similar brands. And like I said before, they are high quality. I continue to wear their clothes all the time, and I know that these new jeans are going to last me a lot better than the other things in my wardrobe. And on top of it, they look great. They're so comfortable, and I spent just as much on the jeans that I am now cleaning out of my wardrobe. So if you're looking for something better, just all around better, go check out Quince. So go do it right now. Refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/ringslore for free shipping and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. Go to quince.com/ringslore for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/ringslore. All right, welcome to our newest patrons, Alex T, Liz L, Eric and Colleen G, Kelly, and Ian W. Welcome to the Patreon. So glad that you are here. I hope you're as excited as I am to get into The Hobbit, and thank you for your support. If you are interested in joining the Patreon, getting the bonus episodes, we're going to have bonus episodes every single episode, every episode that currently exists, every episode that we're currently doing right now. And we're even going to get this week into, where did I put it? The list of Hobbit family names. I'm going to go over the different family names, and there are so many, and they're so interesting. So if you want to join me for that bonus episode, then head over to patreon.com/LOTR Lorecast. Check out all the different stuff you can get. Lots of different things, including like t-shirts and stickers and of course, the bonus episodes and that kind of stuff. Also, I have to shout out our VIP patrons. Let's go down the list as fast as I can because there's a bunch of you and I really do appreciate all of you. AK Music Lover, Apollo, Aragorn III, Alte Morton, Austin C, Azzle Razzle, Barney D, Bo, Black Squirrel, Brandy D, Cutter Metalworks, Daniel Nightweaver, David S, David M, Divine Madman, Fulcrum, Gimli a Break, Gemma D, Jesse P, Jezer, Katie S, Capenna, Lori B, Mason Weathertop, Michael M, Nick K, Nostrils of Sauron, Patrick W, Richard J, Rivqua, Rosie Rose, Sam B, Seju, TJT, and Tour Son of Horror. Thank you so much for your support and everyone else who supports the show. All 175 of you current active patrons. Thank you so much. Also, another way you can help out is leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We got a new one that came in from Hong Kong. Welcome to, I love getting these reviews from people from different countries and things like that. It's so cool to know that this podcast gets out there and that people can find it all over the place. This one says, this is from Mariner HK in Hong Kong, who says, lore and thoughtful guidance for even the veteran Tolkien reader. This podcast is the one that rules them all among all the podcasts I've enjoyed. I'm an old Hobbit and Lord of the Rings reader from my childhood, reread multiple times, but like many, I just got a bit lost in the weeds of the Silmarillion when reading years ago and never attempted the other backstory material. But amid the pandemic and with the Amazon show launching, I found this amazing podcast. Tom unlocks the secrets of the Silmarillion with a guided journey through the entire book. And it's one of those recitations of lore details and technicalities so common online. Oh, it's not one of them. Sorry. I was like, wait a minute. No, it's not one of them. Rather, it's a thoughtful and creative deep dive into the storyline, the characters, the language, the themes, told in Tom's engaging and pleasant narrative. This podcast really opened the doors for me to understanding, appreciating, and enjoying the entire Tolkien backstory, the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, Return of the King appendices, and the various individual studies such as The Fall of Gondolin and The Children of Húrin. This podcast is a gift to all Tolkien fans who want to delve deeper. Thank you so much. So many nice words. So nice of you. Also, if you'd like to leave a 5-star review on, or I guess a rating on Spotify or whatever other platform you listen to this on, or share it with your friends, all of that is super helpful. Thank you so much. Let's get to the good morning conversation. Here we go. There are so many iconic details in the beginning of this story, and it wouldn't be complete without this wonderful conversation between Bilbo and Gandalf about good morning. Bilbo says, good morning, and we find out that he means it. The sun was shining, the grass was very green, and then Gandalf looks at him with his kind of perplexing look and says, what do you mean? He said. Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning? Or that it is a morning to be good on? And you have to remember at this point that this is humorous, and this is the sort of thing that if you were to say it to a child reading through this, you would probably get a giggle. It's not just funny for children, though. It's funny for adults and anybody who doesn't really take an interest in the closer details of things like why we use certain words and certain phrases. What does it actually mean? Good morning. I also think that you could probably say that this little piece of detail here is Tolkien himself engaging in the story in a fun and interesting way, and in a way that shows the kinds of thoughts that he had as a person. And so therefore Gandalf also has too. I mean, there's always so much of an author in their own work. This feels like the kind of conversation Tolkien may have had with a colleague one day discussing, why is it we say good morning when we say hi to people? What does that actually mean? It's kind of like in, at least in American culture right now, when you come across somebody and you want to say hi, oftentimes we say, how's it going? Or how are you? But we don't usually want a truthful response. It's very rare that you would say, how are you doing? And if the person is just kind of not having a great day, you would want them to say, well, not so great. Here's all the terrible things that happened this morning. Like, no, we just go, how are you? And then the other person responds, how are you? And then we move on with the conversation because we don't really want the answer to the question. It's really just a way of saying, hi, I kind of politely care about your well-being. It's weird, right? Anyway, I feel like this is similar in that sort of way. Good morning. Well, what do you mean? And then Bilbo responds, all of them at once, said Bilbo, and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors, into the bargain. Now, all of them at once is a funny response because he's clearly not meaning all of these things. It's almost like he's just like, yeah, whatever. All of them. And it's a good morning for a pipe. Like, I'm in a good mood. I don't really want to debate the meaning of this phrase. Here, I'm just having a pipe. If you've got a pipe, sit down and have fill of mine. Like, here, I'll share some of my tobacco with you. There's no hurry. We have all day ahead of us. He's in a good mood. He's smoking his pipe. He's enjoying the nice weather. And this stranger comes by and he's like, well, okay, strange conversation, but that's fine. Have a smoke with me. Let's hang out for a minute. And this tells us that Bilbo is a pleasant type. He's somebody who is polite and pleasant and friendly to people he doesn't even know, who are clearly outsiders. Gandalf is not a hobbit, for sure. And then he sits down and he starts smoking and he blows a smoke ring. And Gandalf compliments it. He says, very pretty. But I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. And he gets directly down to business, which is clearly not the mode that Bilbo is in right here. Bilbo's in a very relaxed mode. He doesn't want to do business at all. He just wants to enjoy the weather and smoke his pipe. Gandalf says, I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I am arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone. Now, this line I find particularly confusing, or at least interesting, because Gandalf knows that the hobbits are not all about adventure. So putting that in the sentence is, I don't know what the phrase is, burying the lead. He's just kind of saying something that he knows will probably not get a pleasant response, or he's testing Bilbo. He knows that Bilbo is a Took. He's descended from the old Took and from Beldanna. He is personality-wise potentially like they are. And maybe he even knows deep down from watching Bilbo that he might have a little bit more going on than just potentially being like that. So maybe he's saying it and putting it out in the open just to see what kind of response he gets. And he doesn't get the response I think he was hoping for. Bilbo responds, I should think so in these parts. We are plain quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Makes you late for dinner. Now, there's a few details here. We're plain quiet folk with no use for adventures. He's speaking to Gandalf in this sense, not so much like he's somebody coming by that should be smoking a pipe. All of a sudden, the tone shifts, and he's relaying to Gandalf something that he thinks Gandalf wouldn't know, because Gandalf here is a foreigner. And then he says, they make you late for dinner. We clearly see Bilbo's priorities here. Being on time for dinner is much more important than anything that would ever happen on an adventure. And being late for dinner, God forbid. I can't think what anybody sees in them, said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces. Now, braces here are suspenders. He's got his thumbs behind his suspenders in a kind of relaxed, but yet sort of like a them's the facts sort of way. And then he blows out a smoke ring, an even bigger one, and he picks up the letters and begins to read and starts to kind of ignore Gandalf. He's decided in that one statement about adventure that this is not the kind of individual that he really wants to get to know better. And, okay, it's time to be on to other things. Good morning. And he says good morning at last. We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water. He's sending him away. He's like, I'm not interested, and nobody else here is going to be interested. Your foreign ideas of an adventure being a good thing and you looking for somebody to go on this adventure with you is not welcome here. Here being here, the Shire, Hobbiton. Go away. Now, he uses good morning again here, but in a very different sort of way. He just defined good morning as being all those things that Gandalf says it could be, which were predominantly pleasant. And now he's politely saying, you need to leave, by using good morning again. And of course, Gandalf picks up on this, and we continue the conversation about good morning. He says, what a lot of things you do use good morning for, said Gandalf. Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and that it wouldn't be good till I move off. And Gandalf does a thing here that I think is very, very interesting. And I think it may actually work among conversations and the way that we as human beings kind of handle each other. Oftentimes we don't say the thing that we mean, we imply the thing that we mean with other words. And when somebody does that in a trying to be polite sort of way, but the meaning is something that's a little bit more offensive, if you call them out on it, they often back up from that. Because Bilbo does the same thing here. He says, not at all, my dear sir. Like, oh no, I wasn't being rude. Let me see. I don't think I know your name. And by basically calling him out on this, he continues the conversation. He gets Bilbo to say, oh, well, I wasn't being a rude person, so I'll say something polite. I'll ask you your name. And then we get this response from Gandalf. Yes, my dear sir. I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins. And you do know my name, although you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. Again, a humorous turn of a phrase with an exclamation mark, keeping the conflict here down and kind of humorous. To think that I should have lived to be good mornings by Beldana Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door. There's a few things here I think are interesting too. He clearly is letting Bilbo know that, like, I know who you are, and I know who your mother is, which bears a little bit of extra weight there. But then also says, basically, like, you're treating me like I'm a door-to-door salesperson, which is probably very humorous for somebody in the 1930s, where they would have had people coming by the door to sell, who knows, buttons, I guess. Gandalf, good gracious me. We get another turn in Bilbo. Bilbo goes from wanting to send this person away to being very surprised that this legendary Gandalf character, who he's heard about but never really met, is at his door. And then we learn a little bit more about Gandalf and the Old Took. Not the wandering wizard that gave Old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone until ordered. Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses. And I have to wonder, did Tolkien have a specific rescuing of princesses in mind? Because if I recall correctly, Luthien saves Beren, and then both of them are saved by the eagles, and maybe that counts as the rescuing of princesses. Or maybe there's another story he had in mind, or maybe this was a just general fairy tale motif that is getting referenced, just like dragons, goblins, giants. They all seem to be the general stuff of fairy tales, right? And on top of that, the unexpected luck of widows' sons. I'm not sure if that's a specific reference to one of Tolkien's works either. Nothing exactly comes to mind. But again, if I'm missing something here, please point it out. Let me know. Then he goes on and says, not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. And this is something that was definitely focused on, not only in this story, but in The Lord of the Rings and in the movies. We get to see Gandalf's fireworks. But the description here is a bit different than what we see in the movies. I remember those. Old Took used to have them on Midsummer's Eve, which means that Old Took would have Gandalf come by on Midsummer's Eve, and Midsummer's Eve may have been an important date for who knows what reason, maybe one of the adventures that they went on or something like that. And then we get the description of the fireworks from Bilbo. They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons and laburnums of fire and hang in the twilight all evening. They looked like flowers, which is true. I could imagine fireworks looking like flowers. And hanging in the twilight all evening seems like they exploded in the sky and then stayed in the sky, or there were so many of them that it took all evening for all the fireworks to go off. I'm not sure which is being implied here. The first would be more magical. You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe. Also, that he was very fond of flowers, which I think is just kind of a funny comment on Bilbo, and maybe even sometimes as a writer or as a creator, you kind of put something in that feels right, but also you feel like I could have written that better. But then you go, no, this actually matches the character better if I don't write this better, if an improved version of this sentence didn't exist. And I feel like that might be what's happening here. And then we get a little bit more about Gandalf. Not the Gandalf who is responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures. How many times has Gandalf done this? Is there a long line of hobbits who have gone on adventures with Gandalf? Or is this one of those things that gets blown out of proportion, as many rumors do? Or is this Bilbo revealing a side of himself that is prone to exaggeration? Maybe it's all of those things. And then he details the adventures a little bit. Anything from climbing trees, which is funny to think of as being an adventure, to visiting elves, definitely seems like more of an adventure, or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. What other shores would they be sailing to? Down the coastline? Clearly not somewhere like Valinor. Bless me, life used to be quite notice the Took side peeking out. You used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business. He shuts out the Took side, but you can clearly see a glimpse of his interest in adventures. Where else should I be, said the wizard. All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. And I think this might be the answer to the conversation and why Gandalf put the conversation in the direction he did. He wanted to get a sense of who Bilbo was, and if Bilbo even remembered who he was. And he has his answer now. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly at any rate, and that is not without hope. Hope for what? Hope that Gandalf has that he is more adventurous than he knows. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for. What you asked for? What does that mean? What does Gandalf know? We'll dig into that in the next episode. And remember, if you want more content, join us on the Patreon and you can have a conversation with me about the different Hobbit names. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful week. Thanks for listening to the Lord of the Rings Lorecast. If you'd like to learn more about other fantasy worlds, check out my other podcasts, The Elder Scrolls Lorecast, The Witcher Lorecast, and more at robotsradio.net. If you'd like to reach out, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a note on Twitter at robots_radio, or join our amazing community on the Robots Radio Discord. There are links in the show notes, or just search Robots Radio Discord, or find the link on robotsradio.net. I'll see you next time.